Okay, class, we're talking on female reproductive anatomy and ovum development, but however, this video is totally about female reproductive anatomy. So, what we have is, in the female reproductive anatomy, we have the ovaries, the female gonads. In a previous one, we talked about the testes in the male. And we have the accessory ducts, which would be the uterine tubes, also called fallopian tubes. Some call them the oviducts. Then we have the uterus, and we have the vagina. The internal genitalia of the female are the ovaries, the uterine tubes, the uterus and the vagina, and then the external genitalia, which would be in the vulva. We will talk about later. This here is a lateral view of the female reproductive system. All right. Here is your oviduct or fallopian tube. This here is the uterus here. This right here is the lumen in the uterus here. This here is the round ligament. So the round ligament holds the uterus. This is one of the ligaments, one of the three ligaments that holds the uterus. The round ligament hooks to the labia majora. Right here is your cervix. It's the female cervix right here. That's the female cervix, and we'll be looking more. This here is a fornix. So here's the cervix, here's the vagina, here's a recession here in the posterior aspect of the cervix, which we call the posterior fornix, and here's another one in the anterior fornix right there. This is the vagina right here. This is a fold of peritoneum down here, line patch. The recto-uterine pouch, which is behind the posterior. This is the bladder here, so this is the vesiculo-uterine pouch. Okay. This is the bladder right here, urethra there. This right here is the opening to the vagina there, opening to the vestibule. These are the greater vestibular glands, which are the same thing as the glands in the male, which were Cowper's glands, vulval glands. And we'll go further. Okay, mons pumus, labium minora, labium majora. Okay, here's a anterior view right here, or shall I say a posterior view of the uterus here, posterior view versus. And so what we have is the uterus up here above where the fallopian tubes enter. This would be the fundus. This is the body of the uterus. Right here is a narrowed area called the isthmus, right before it goes into the cervix. The opening between the isthmus into the cervix is called the internal os. Then you have the canal of the cervix, uterine canal, and then the external os is the hole entering into the vagina there. Right here, those pouches I mentioned about I should say pouch fornixes. This here is a fornix there, fornix there. Right here is your fallopian tube. That's the fimbriated end right there. Then I come up with the infundibulum portion, then the ampulla, then the tube itself, and then right here is the isthmus that goes into the cornu of the uterus, oftentimes called the cornu of the uterus. Right here is the suspensory ligament of the going to the ovary, and that hooks to the body sidewall. The suspensory ligament right there. Blood vessels come into the ovary from that, which are coming off the aorta, the ovarian artery. Come into the ovary would be the ovarian blood vessels off the aorta, and also a branch off the uterus going to the ovary, which would be the ovarian branch of the uterine artery going there. Right here is a tent, a peritoneum that would kind of be a tent hanging over these ligaments. Right here is the ovarian ligament. And this is what we call the broad ligament, this whole thing here. And of the broad ligament, you have the mesosalpinx, which is from the tube down to the ovary, and hanging over the ovary, like a tent, would be the mesovarian. And then below it, which can attach to the uterus, would be the mesometrium. Okay. Here again is the vagina with this rugae. The cardinal ligament is a ligament that will attach to the side wall of the body to hold the uterus in position, and attaches to the inferior portion of the cervix and superior portion of the vagina to hold the uterus in position. So there are three ligaments holding the uterus. This one is the uterosacral ligament, which goes posteriorly to the sacrum. The other is this cardinal ligament, which goes to the side wall that you have, and this round ligament, which goes through the internal canal and hooks to the labia majora. This ligament, that uterosacral ligament is real tough, very strong. The cardinal too, but the uterosacral is very tough, very strong. So the uterus has more mobility and flexibility going up and down based upon the round ligament hooked to the labia majora. Okay. Then we'll talk about the uterine blood vessels, but they run up laterally. The uterine blood vessels are coming from the internal iliac arteries. Okay. Let's go a little further here. So we talked about that. Okay. The ovaries are held in place, as I alluded to, by the ovarian ligament. Go back to the ovarian ligament. And that's a ligament coming from the uterus here, the ovarian ligament. That particular ligament comes from the uterus to the ovary, holding it in place. And then the other one is suspensory. This one here is strong, but this one is even stronger. Suspensory ligament of the ovary coming from the body side wall here. So two ligaments, ovarian ligament coming from the uterus, and suspensory ligament of the ovary coming from the body side wall. The mesovarian, we talked about that. That's it, which goes over. It's part of the broad ligament that covers over the ovary there, and it's coming off here. So it would have covered over. It would have essentially covered slightly over the fallopian tube right there, coming down and then on down. Okay. Here again is that picture. The ovaries are surrounded by the tunica albuginea, which was the same thing that surrounded the testes. The blood supply to the ovaries, ovarian arteries, and ovarian branch of the uterine. Ovarian arteries, the ovarian arteries are coming off the aorta, and the ovarian branch of the uterine artery is a branch off the uterine artery. Okay. The ovaries is a closed-in structure, like many closed-in structure, and a generic deal. Whenever you have a closed-in structure, the outer part is called the cortex, and the middle is called the medulla. You should have seen that in the kidneys and other areas too, and also in the adrenal gland. Okay. Actually, also in the hair, cortex and medulla. That's kind of a generic term. The center being the medulla, and the outer being the cortex. That's a little thing to keep in mind there. It's a generic. Okay, in the ovaries are eggs, follicles, and we'll be talking more about that. Primary follicles, secondary follicles, and all that material we'll talk about later. But I wanted to be more into gross anatomy right now. This is more in histological anatomy. Okay, so we'll go further. Here's the ovary again. This would be the medullary area. This would be the cortex area out here. Okay, your blood vessels coming into that area there. Here would be the follicles we'll talk about. Here's a follicle. Here's a that has just ruptured. Okay, ovulation, and then once it ruptures, develop something called the corpus luteum, that spot that it ruptured from. So this would be this after it ruptures, and if nothing happens to this, and you don't get and the female does not get pregnant, it becomes scar tissue known as the corpus albicans. Again, we'll be talking about that more in the physiology area. Okay, the uterine tube, uterus, vagina. Again, this is the picture that we described with all the components. Here's the uterine tube again. We have the fimbriated end, and then from the infundibulum, the ampulla area, which here, and then the tube itself, and then the isthmus, which goes directly into the cornu of the uterus. So fimbriated, infundibulum, ampulla. Ampulla is generally where fertilization will occur. And then the isthmus, because remember in fertilization, the sperm come up through the cervical canal into here. They're swept up into the uterine tube, and then the egg would have been ovulated, generally met in the ampulla, and then fertilization would occur, and then from that point on, multiplication, mitosis of something will come until something called a marl, and then about 5 to 7 days you'll implant into the uterus if pregnancy occurs. Everything goes correctly. Okay. Here are the uterine tubes again. The epithelium on the uterine tubes is ciliated, non-ciliated columnar. The cilia, of course, obviously would sweep the egg and so forth like that, and the non-ciliated would be more providing moisture. Okay, and non also nourish and provide moisture. Okay. Here again is so the uterus has a body fundus and isthmus. The fundus is generally considered this portion at the superior area up here, about the area where the fallopian tubes are coming in and above. The body is the main part. Then it goes into a constricted area known as the isthmus. And then the inferior portion of the isthmus is the internal os, which leads into the cervix. And this would be the canal of the cervix. External os will lead into the vagina. So we talked about the uterus, the cervix, cervical canal, the cervical glands secrete mucus. Now the vagina doesn't really have mucus glands, so it depends on cervical glands to lubricate it. And since it's a mucous membrane, it also is going to have a certain amount of mucus leaking through the wall, but it doesn't actually have, let's say, a gland per se. And you know how mucus is formed, if you may recall, from something being secreted known as mucin, which is a glycoprotein, and once it mixes with water on top of the epithelial cells, that's what's called mucus. And the amount of water determines the viscosity. The less the water, the more viscous. The more the water, the less viscous. So mucus itself is not a secretion per se, it's mucin mixed with water. Support of the uterus, we talked about the uterosacral, the round ligaments, the cardinal ligaments. We showed that in the picture here and discussed that, which you have here. Okay. Go a little further. Peritoneal pouches, those were the pouches that we alluded to here. You had a pouch between the rectum and the uterus, recto-uterine, and a pouch between the bladder, blind pouch, a peritoneum dipping down, which is a vesiculo-uterine pouch. That's in the front, anterior, that's in the back. Okay. Then we have the uterine wall. I'm going to end right here and we'll start at the uterine wall on the next video.